Hello, YouTube world. I wanted to talk to you about something I saw today concerning the Rockefeller Foundation's Operation Lockstep plan. And I'd meant to do a video on this months ago and got busy and kind of forgot about it. Some of you have probably already seen this in other places. But anyhow, this is a document you're looking at called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. And this was put out, as you see here, by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Global Business Network in 2010. And basically, what this document does is it states different kind of disaster scenarios happening to the world. One of them is a global pandemic, which we're going to talk about, which is literally just like what we just had and are going through still with the COVID, the virus. Another one is a climate change crisis, and another one is a cyber attack hacking crisis. So, what's interesting is I want to play a clip from you. This was mentioned tonight on Laura Ingram's show on Fox News. So let me just go ahead and play the clip. And first, let me say, Fox News, you're going to get mostly lies on there. It's not a credible news source. I'm not saying that. I've covered that in other videos. We can't trust the mainstream media. Obviously goes without saying, just need to repeat that. But let me go ahead and play this clip for you.
Oh, by the way, the think tanks in Washington, it's a malapropism, think tanks are on board too. Back in 2010, the far-left Rockefeller Foundation helped produce a shockingly prescient report on 4 possible future scenarios that could play out over the next 15 to 20 years. One of them involved a global pandemic that's remarkably similar to what happened over the last year. During this pandemic, quote, international mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt. Normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. National leaders around the world imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temp checks.
And if you haven't seen this Operation Lockstep document, it's pretty incredible, where they're talking about all these regulations, mandatory face masks, temperature checks, international mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt. Normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. National leaders around the world imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks, just like what we've seen for over the last year.
Rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temp checks. Wow, that does sound familiar. 10, 11 years ago. The report went on to detail how the powers that be would never let that imaginary crisis end. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. Citizens willingly gave up some of their sovereignty and their privacy to more paternalistic states in exchange for greater safety and stability. This heightened oversight took many forms: biometric IDs for all citizens, tighter regulations of industries whose stability was deemed vital to national interests. This heightened oversight.
Let's focus in on this now. Biometric IDs. Biometric IDs. Think about that, then lump that in. Think about that in terms of the COVID jab. The patent 060606, the microchip that may be in there, the tracking people, monitoring their body functions, all the things I'm sure a lot of you have already read about the COVID jab, biometric IDs. Think of that in terms of Revelation 13 and the mark.
Oversight took many forms: biometric IDs for all citizens, tighter regulations of industries whose stability was deemed vital to national interests. Now, despite the Rockefeller report predating this show by many years, none of what was laid out in that report should surprise any Ingram Angle viewers.
So, very interesting. And we see clearly that this whole COVID pandemic was planned many years ago, at least 2010, probably much longer before that, many years before that. But very clear, just rubbing it in your face with this document, that the Rockefeller Foundation, uh, had a part in the people involved with that are part of these globalist elites that planned this whole pandemic many years ago. Now, why would they be playing this on Fox News, on mainstream media, where they peddle mostly lies? Could be a variety of reasons. One could be lesser magic. These occultists believe the best place to hide the truth is in plain sight, and that they literally gain more and more power by showing you the truth, and you still being too naive and dumb to understand the truth. They believe they gain power from putting these things in public view. Another theory is that there's literally a universal law in which God requires Satan to publicly show his plans before he does these plans. Another part of it is possibly to mock us all, to show us the truth in plain sight and mock us, and to really show ownership of us and mock us. So, quite interesting to see that on mainstream media. Here's the document for you. Scenarios for the future of technology and international development, put out by the Rockefeller Foundation, the Global Business Network. And I just want to take a look at the scenario we're talking about here, Lockstep. I'm not going to look at the other scenarios for, climate change crisis. Another one was a cyber attack, but this is the one we want to look at. This is Lockstep and had to do with a global pandemic and setting up kind of a global police state. Here you see the street cameras. I'm not going to read all of this. You can read it all on your own time. I'm just going to read a little of it. We see Lockstep, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. And I'll read a little of this. In 2012, the pandemic that the world had been anticipating for years finally hit. Unlike 2009's H1N1, this new influenza strain originating from wild geese. So interesting. They say here it's a flu strain originating from wild geese. And then what in reality happened was the COV, which they said originated from bats, which is total garbage, and is even now that whole story is not even being pushed, where they're kind of having to admit the lab leak theory. So reading on, even the most pandemic prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world, infecting nearly 20% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months, the majority of them healthy young adults. The pandemic also had a deadly effect on economics. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Even locally normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. And this was written in 2010, and they're talking about hitting in 2012. Isn't that interesting? If you reverse those numbers, 2021 and 2021, we're living in it right now with COV virus. Here we see the pictures of security cameras. You can read this on your own. I'm not going to read all of it. I just want to read the very end of this to give you a little more of an idea. So they talk more about this kind of pandemic scenario, and here at the end it says, by 2025, people seem to be growing weary of so much top-down control and letting leaders and authorities make choices for them. Wherever national interests clashed with individual interests, there was conflict. Sporadic pushback became increasingly organized and coordinated as disaffected youth and people who had seen their status and opportunities slip away, largely in developing countries, incited civil unrest. And of course, we saw some of that last year with the George Floyd riots in America. In 2026, protesters in Nigeria brought down the government, fed up with the entrenched cronyism and corruption. Even those who liked the greater stability and predictability, this world began to grow uncomfortable and constrained by so many tight rules and by the strictness of national boundaries. The feeling lingered that sooner or later something would inevitably upset the neat order that the world's governments had worked so hard to establish. So, of course, it's talking about through this pandemic a global police state being set up, which we're now seeing. This was in 2012, they talked about this scenario. And that is what has happened with this pandemic. We've seen a problem, reaction, solution scenario where they create the problem, then wait for the reaction. And we've had this overwhelming fear that has helped people, that has gripped people. So we've been in this state of fear and compliance of the government taking away all of our rights and liberties and people just complying. And the same people that create, the problem give us a solution. And now, what is the main solution we're seeing given to us? The COV jab, the juice. The jab is the solution has been given to us. Is it the mark? Personally, I think more and more is very likely that it is the mark. So anyhow, just wanted to share this with you. Operation Lockstep from the Rockefeller Foundation was just mentioned on mainstream media tonight. Quite interesting. Had to share that with you. So, anyhow, I'll talk to you soon and have a wonderful day.